It was 5:45 p.m. when I finished marking the last stake in the northwest quadrant. With the light dropping fast, I decided to camp right there instead of hiking the 4 miles back to the truck. I'm a field man and have spent years working alone in dense forest. I know the difference between the sound of a bear, an elk, and the wind. What happened that night doesn't fit into any standard zoological category. At 8:30 p.m., the forest shut down. It wasn't gradual, it was like someone cut a cable. Crickets, wind and the fir tops, the distant flow of the creek, everything stopped within seconds. That kind of silent zone usually indicates a top predator, but a cougar doesn't silence an entire valley. I lit my small gas stove to heat some coffee. The smell of propane mixed suddenly with another odor, something organic and damp, like wet clothes left in a closed basement with a faint metallic edge. At 9:15 p.m., I heard the first footstep. It came from about 40 meters uphill. Heavy, deliberate. Whatever was there was walking on 2 legs. The pace was too slow for a human moving at night without a headlamp and far too heavy for an average man. From the vibration through the ground, I estimated the weight at well over 200 kilos. I didn't call out. I knew it wasn't a lost hiker. I switched off my headlamp so I wouldn't give away my exact position and stayed still beside the tent, one hand on the bear spray. It didn't come down into the camp. It began to circle me. For 3 hours, it kept a precise distance of about 30 meters, tracing a semicircle along the edge of the darkness. It didn't step on branches by accident. It snapped them so I would hear. It was herding behavior, territorial. It was telling me, I know exactly where you are. At 2 a.m., the most unsettling thing happened. From the brush, I heard a low, vibrating, guttural sound that wasn't a roar. It was imitation. The thing tried to reproduce the metallic sound of my stove lighting, a rough click hiss, followed by a strong nasal exhale. It was studying me. I didn't sleep. I stayed seated against a tree until the gray light of dawn, around 6:30, broke the tension. While breaking camp, I looked for evidence. The ground was a thick mat of dry pine needles, impossible for clear tracks. But about 20 meters from my tent, I found something else. 3 young fir trees, roughly 10 centimeters in diameter, had been bent and woven together at a height of about 2.5 meters, forming a crude barrier across my exit route. They weren't wind damaged. They had been manipulated with the level of strength and manual control no bear has. I walked down to the truck without looking back. There was no pursuit, just that persistent pressure at the back of my neck until I started the engine. That area of forest isn't haunted, and there are no movie monsters there. There is something biological, intelligent, and highly territorial living along those ridges, and we are the intruders. I haven't accepted any jobs that require overnight stays alone in the northern sector since. I am a civilian camper with enough experience to travel alone and follow the basic rules of remote areas in the interior of British Columbia. I carry no weapons, I don't hunt, and I usually stay several days in the same place when the terrain allows it. The area where this occurred was approved for dispersed camping and had no formal history of incidents. The first night was normal. The second began to feel different, though I couldn't say exactly when the change happened. The forest was still there, but it wasn't functioning properly. Sounds appeared and cut out without any clear pattern. It wasn't calm. It was as if something interrupted the natural rhythm and then stepped away. Near the camp, a persistent smell appeared. It wasn't strong, but it was constant. It wasn't garbage or a dead animal. I associated it with wet hair mixed with soil and resin. I checked my food, pack, and hanging system. Everything was sealed and elevated as park rules require. Later, the movement began. Not hurried footsteps, but slow shifts, always just beyond the direct reach of my headlamp. The impression wasn't of a lost animal, but of something maintaining distance deliberately. When I moved, the sound stopped. When I stayed still, it returned from a different angle. At one point, I distinguished a partial figure among the trees. It wasn't a complete sighting. It was a dark mass, taller than it was wide, with defined shoulders and a generally humanoid structure, though without a clearly human posture. It wasn't fully upright or hunched. It seemed to adapt itself to the terrain. Its body didn't reflect the light. It absorbed the beam in an unusual way. What stood out most was the way it moved. There was no hurry or sudden flight. The weight shifted with precision as if it knew the ground well. I heard a single, isolated knock against a trunk, followed by prolonged silence. I didn't interpret it as an attack, but as a minimal warning. Something was there and had no intention of coming closer. The dominant feeling wasn't fear, but constant pressure, the certainty of being observed with attention. I reduced the fire and avoided unnecessary movement. The figure never crossed the edge of the clearing. It stayed at the boundary, controlling the distance. I remained inside the tent until morning. The smell faded during the night, and with daylight, the forest returned to normal activity. I found no clear tracks. The ground was covered in wet leaves and branches. Any marks were impossible to interpret. I reported the episode at the end of my stay, as regulations require. I later learned that other similar reports had been received, which led to an administrative review and temporary restrictions in the area. I still camp, but I choose different places now, not because I believe I was in danger, but because I learned that some places don't need you to drive you away to make it clear they don't expect you to stay. I have been a ranger in the Interior District of British Columbia since 2014. I am recording an incident that occurred during a routine patrol of dispersed campsites. That night, the forest displayed anomalous behavior. It was not complete silence, but a discontinuity, the absence of insects and birds in stretches where they normally remain active. I stopped the vehicle at the access point near Kettlehook Creek and continued on foot along a secondary trail, using low illumination to avoid disturbing wildlife. A short distance in, I detected a persistent organic odor that was difficult to classify. It did not correspond to decay or ordinary dampness. It was heavier, similar to wet hair mixed with freshly disturbed soil. I stopped and marked the location for an internal report. From the closed forest along one side of the trail, I heard dry, deliberate knocks, spaced apart and lacking any erratic pattern. I did not respond or advance. I remained still. The sound occurred again farther ahead, as if something were moving while maintaining a lateral distance. There was no running, no random snapping of branches. The impression was of controlled accompaniment, not flight. The wind shifted and the odor briefly intensified. My reaction was physical, tightness in the chest and restrained breathing. I initiated a slow withdrawal as outlined in procedures for unclassified encounters with large wildlife. I did not run. At one point, between the trees, I perceived a dark, motionless mass positioned at a height incompatible with that of a deer or a black bear in a normal stance. When I directed my flashlight toward it, there was no eyeshine and no sudden reaction, only a gradual redistribution of weight, as if something ceased leaning against the ground. Back at the vehicle, I conducted a wider inspection using full light. The ground was covered in damp leaf litter. No clear tracks or usable markings were identified. The event was reported by radio as an unclassified interaction with large wildlife. No immediate search was initiated due to the absence of verifiable indicators. In the days that followed, there were voluntary campsite abandonments, complaints of deliberate nighttime sounds, and a second report of a strong odor along the same corridor. Given the repeated patterns and the lack of conclusive evidence, I recommended a temporary closure of the northern sector, a measure approved on preventive safety grounds. I do not claim to have identified a specific species. I do, however, record behavior that was intentional, territorial, and consistent. The area remains restricted during nighttime hours, not as a response to fear, but as the result of a prudent assessment. I've been crossing the interior of Idaho since the late 1990s. What I experienced at Broken Crag Pass doesn't belong to any of those categories, and it's the sole reason I stopped traveling alone. I set up my lightweight tent on a granite ledge off the main trail to avoid the north wind. It was 7:40 p.m. when I finished securing my food in the bear-proof container, placing it the regulation 100 meters from camp. The forest was calm, carrying that dense stillness typical of late autumn. At 2:15 a.m., I woke up abruptly. There was no noise, only a complete absence of it. The wind had stopped, and the nocturnal insects were utterly silent. The air inside the tent felt heavy, charged. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the rot people describe on internet forums. It was subtler, deeply turned wet earth mixed with sour musk, like a territorial animal, with a metallic note underneath, similar to copper. I heard a footstep. Crunch. The sound came from the gravel about 5 meters from my head. It was a bipedal step carrying immense weight. To make that kind of compacted granite crack, I estimated the subject would have to weigh close to 300 kilos. What was unsettling was the control. It wasn't dragging its feet. Each step was lifted and placed with deliberate precision. I froze inside my sleeping bag, one hand gripping the pepper spray. The silhouette blocked the moonlight through the tent wall. It was massive, filling the entire eastern side. What followed lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but it felt much longer. Something touched the tent. It wasn't a swipe or a strike. A hand, or something with the dexterity of a hand, pressed against the nylon fabric from outside, directly over my chest. I could see the outline of the pressure, a broad palm, far larger than a human's, without prominent claws. It pressed gently, testing the resistance of the material, like someone checking a piece of fruit for ripeness. I felt a low vibration, a guttural purr that resonated through my sternum. It wasn't aggressive, it was dominant curiosity. It was inspecting what it had found. Then it withdrew. I heard 3 fast, heavy steps moving back into the brush, followed by a sharp whistle, bird-like in tone, but backed by impossible lung capacity. At dawn, around 6:45, I stepped out with my knife in hand. There were no tracks on the hard rock. I went to check my food container. The polycarbonate canister, designed to withstand grizzly bear bites, wasn't where I had left it. I found it 50 meters away, placed, not thrown, on top of a flat stump. The container was closed. There were no teeth marks or scratches. It was, however, coated in a clear, viscous slime. The most unsettling part was that it had been set upside down, balanced perfectly in a way that required precise manual manipulation. I packed my gear in 10 minutes and descended the mountain without stopping. I didn't leave out of fear of being eaten, but out of the certainty that I had been observed, assessed, and spared by something that considers that forest its private property. I've never returned to Broken Crag.